Welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. Happy Tuesday morning to everybody, or whenever it is that you are listening to this midweek episode as we turn the page from Auburn's SEC opening win over Missouri. I think we've kind of squeezed that one for all it's worth. Pretty insane game. A couple Auburn players yesterday were saying that they just had to go back to their dorm rooms and decompress after the game. Robbie Ashford and Keontae Scott both saying that they just kind of sat around for a little bit and really couldn't believe what happened. But at the end of the day, like we talked about after the game, Auburn's 1-0, and that's all that matters. And now they head into their first division matchup of the season against LSU, joined here by Mark Murphy and Jason Caldwell. And unfortunately for Auburn heading into this game, some more injury news on the offense. Of course, last week they were without TJ Finley at quarterback. We'll see if he can return this week. Brian Harsin did say he will return to practice at some point this week ahead of this game, but Robbie Ashford is still listed as the starter. But the injury, and everyone was kind of, crossing their fingers, but, unfortunately, Auburn's starting center, Tate Johnson, is going to have elbow surgery on Thursday. He was injured in the first quarter. I believe it was the second drive of the game, if I'm not mistaken. So he is now out. According to Brian Harsin, he said it could be season-ending, and I think that's a pretty fair assessment when you talk about an injury that's 6 to 8 weeks, according to Harsin. And so, Jason, it seems like just yesterday we were on here talking about the impact of Nick Brahms, and obviously this is not the same. Tate Johnson is not the same kind of veteran player. He certainly had a lot of struggles here in the early season, but at the end of the day, now you're on to Jaleel Irvin at center, who entered fall camp as your number 3 guy. And so, a couple injuries already to Auburn's starting center. And so, we're going to see we didn't see much of it last week in the starting lineup. We didn't see any shakeups after they performed poorly on the offensive line against Penn State. We absolutely will because of Tate's injury. We absolutely will heading into the LSU game, and I don't know. They've been shuffling a lot. Well, maybe we'll see some other changes. But the big news is that for the second straight injury there at center, Auburn has lost its starter, and seems like both are probably going to be season-ending injuries.
Yeah, and I'm not so certain that we see Jaleel Irvin, to be honest. I won't be shocked if we see Brandon Council at center for this game and see them do some shaking up on that offensive line. And that's something I mentioned yesterday. I think, when you look at moving forward, I'm sure they probably didn't like what they saw out of the rest of that offense on Saturday. And so when you start thinking about what you do moving forward, you've got some options at the guard positions, and you could move a guy like Brandon Council to center because of not only having Cam Stutz step up and Keandre Jones, but Alec Jackson is a guy that can play all over that offensive line, and we saw him at guard some on Saturday. You could get bigger, by putting a guy like Brandon Council at center. You got Avery Jernigan as well, so there's a few options there at center, but it's not 1998 yet, Mark. But when you start getting to number 3 at the center position, there's a reason why guys are 2 and 3 and not 1. And it normally doesn't bode well for the future when you start running down the line, especially at a position like center.
Yeah, considering that Tate Johnson was having his struggles out there, it's not a good situation, because if somebody was playing better than him, he would be out there as the number 1 guy. And, we've seen him get down to the 16 center before, Jason. Don't think it's going to get that bad, but it's really going to be interesting to see what they do. Alec Jackson's even taken some snaps in practice before too. And if you want to go bigger, he's certainly an option there. But I like your idea of playing Brandon Council there, because he's actually done it in college games back when he was playing in Akron for the Zips. And they've got more depth at guard than any position on the offensive line. So it's not going to be a big deal to move Council out of the guard spot, I believe. So, and Brandon Council's played started more football games than a lot of guys in the NFL. So he is about as experienced as you're going to find up there. So I think he could handle the assignment. The big question is, how consistently is he going to snap the ball in shotgun formation?
Yeah, and you look at the Pro Football Focus grades, which obviously are not gospel by any means, but the lowest graded run blocking offensive lineman and the lowest graded pass blocking offensive lineman in that game was Jaleel Irvin. And so I think he had his fair share of struggles when he came in. For Tate Johnson there, obviously so much of the focus has been on the offensive line. I think Auburn fans are realizing over the past couple weeks that you can't do much of else if you don't get push there. And their pass blocking wasn't atrocious against Missouri, but it certainly wasn't where you need it to be. But I thought all things considered, and we talked about this after the game, but all things considered, Robbie Ashford didn't have a horrible game. 12 of 18. I mean, did pretty much everything he could do. The biggest thing was not turning the ball over. Of course, you got lucky there that interception fell through the defensive back's hands in the first possession of overtime. But the quarterback situation could change this week. So, of course, like we mentioned, Brian Harsin said Finley will practice this week. From everything I understand, and y'all can correct me if you've heard differently, but maybe a little intel for our readers is that, or our listeners, excuse me, is that he might not be throwing until Thursday or Friday, and so that constitutes a return to practice. It does, but you're talking about maybe just getting a guy in at the end of the week, and he is the better passer. He is the guy I think you need in this offense moving forward. But Robbie Ashford listed as a starter on the depth chart this week, Jason. I certainly wouldn't be surprised if we go without TJ Finley again in this game. But like you mentioned a couple days ago, nobody wants to get back on that field more for this game than a guy like TJ Finley against his former team.
Yeah, if you're not back out there till later in the week, then it could be a situation which, and nobody's told us this, but sure what it seemed like to me Saturday that Zach Calzada was an emergency guy. That, hey, we're gonna have him out here, and if he's available in an emergency, then you can have it. Mark asked Brian Harsin yesterday about Trey Lindsey and about him kind of where he fit. He just kind of glossed over the question. But Trey Lindsey was getting the third team reps at quarterback behind Holden Garner, and Calzada was throwing a little bit. So it looked like maybe emergency. That might be the same situation for a guy like TJ Finley this week. Maybe, hey, if we need him, then we may have to go to him, but you'd probably rather not. I mean, I don't think there's any question that Robbie Ashford is the quarterback heading into Saturday. Now he gets the chance to build on his first start, the most playing time he's ever had in a game, and now see what they can add to the offense, because they got to add something. There's no question about that. They've got to get more production out of that offense to have any chance. And LSU, this is not the LSU of old. There's still a much better football team than Auburn played last Saturday.
Yeah, particularly talk about an uptick of talent there on the defensive front, which is going to be a challenge for Auburn's offensive line. So seems like Holden Garner will be the backup, or at least, like Jason said, listed on the depth chart as the co-backup with TJ Finley. And Mark, he only played a couple drives. It wasn't exactly the most optimal situation for a true freshman quarterback to be thrown into in his first game, but he got a lot of praise yesterday from his teammates and from Brian Harsin for just going in there and being able to handle that. And biggest thing, again, not turning the ball over for this offense. But Robbie Ashford echoed something we've been hearing all preseason. We heard all preseason, now into the season, just how good of a passer he is, and just how pretty his ball looks when he's throwing it down the field. Robbie Ashford said, "Look, he's got the prettiest ball in the room." Myself included. And so they might have to go to him again in this game. I think maybe you wouldn't want to. Obviously, the only reason they did against Missouri was because of that quick kind of stinger injury to Robbie Ashford. But certainly seems like Harsin, Garner's teammates, are trying to make sure his confidence stays high heading into this game in case they need to use him again.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right there. And, I won't be shocked to see him play this week because I'm still skeptical about whether or not TJ Finley's going to play. Considering it's LSU and where he was the previous starter, I think he would, if he can play, he will definitely try to play. But, the big puzzle to me concerning Holden Garner is not that he played. My puzzle was back in preseason, they had a chance to give him some more meaningful opportunities running the first or second team in practice. It just didn't happen. He was just pretty much an afterthought. And fortunately for Auburn and for Garner, he was able to go through spring practice and winter workouts and get adjusted to college football. But, still being thrown in there in that situation in the third quarter with the game on the line, that's a lot for a true freshman to handle, particularly a guy who hasn't got a lot of reps at all in practice. So, it was a mixed bag. He threw a ball he shouldn't have thrown out there in the flat that was actually a lateral. And then John Samuel Schenker bailed him out and got on it. And then he threw a beautiful pass to Schenker to convert a third down, and Auburn only converted 3, and one was by the freshman, a really nice pass. And so I think this kid's got a lot of upside. It's a real good question about whether or not they're going to redshirt him. He can play 3 more games and still a redshirt under the current rules. Auburn's, got 8 games left. That's certainly something to watch, but I like his potential, and I won't be surprised if down the road he is a starter. And your point about Robbie Ashford saying good things about him fits right in with everything else we're hearing about him, Nathan.
Yeah, speaking of red shirts, it is now that time. There's been 4 games so far, and so you might see some changes here into game 5, depending on whether or not the coaching staff wants to redshirt certain guys. One of those guys is Omar Kelly, Jason. We've seen him in all 4 games so far, and he had a nice third down conversion there.
Yeah, I would bet everything I own that we don't see Omar Kelly redshirt. I think he's going to continue to see more action, and I'm of the mind. I have been for quite a few years now. If I'm a coach of staff, I'm not redshirting one player that can help me win a game. Not one guy, because it's too important now. One win is the difference between keeping your job and going somewhere else. And now if you're playing guys just to play them, then that's one thing. But if I got a guy that can help me win a game, and right now, Omar Kelly's been in the game in some key situations, him and Camden Brown both, I think you'll see those guys continue to develop. And something we've talked about before too, and I'm glad you mentioned Amari, but the wide receiver rotation has to streamline. And we saw it a little bit more last week, but you got to start finding guys that fit in those roles and get them the football. Obviously Coy Moore stepping up was a big deal, and they may have to hold him down in restraints until they kick the game off Saturday, because he's going to be ready to roll. But you look at the productivity at wide receiver right now: Coy Moore, Javaris Johnson, Shedrick Jackson, now Amari Kelly, Landon King. I mean, those are the guys, and Camden Brown. That's the guys that have been the only productivity you've had at wide receiver so far. And I think you got to roll with those guys now. And we've seen a lot of movement out there. It's time to settle in a little bit and start to maybe figure out some things to do with those particular players, I think.
Yeah, obviously it's been situational. Each game is different in terms of what Auburn does when it needs to be put in a scoring position. But right now they are the only Power 5 team in the country that has yet to have a wide receiver score a touchdown for them this season. And we talked about it earlier in the year. Poor Javaris Johnson, a couple games in, probably led the country in near touchdowns. He finished at like the 3, the 4, and the 5-yard line on big catches. But you brought up a good point, Jason. Trying to streamline that rotation and just get a little bit of continuity in terms of what you want to do at wide receiver. We see Landon King's snaps kind of fluctuate. I think this past game maybe wasn't the best example because they didn't get into the red zone that often. Then you have Chick Dawson didn't play. Chick Dawson did not play a snap on Saturday, and you saw Camden Brown play the most snaps he had all season. A couple catches there for him, but overall it's a group that definitely needs to take another step forward. But at the same time, it all goes back to the offensive line, all goes back to pass protection, all goes back to trying to get the ball downfield, which right now Auburn hasn't done a very good job of in the past couple games. There was another statistic, speaking of the offense's shortcomings, Mark, there was another statistic this morning from Bill Connolly at ESPN in a breakdown of that Auburn-Missouri game. The percent of runs for Auburn that went 0 or fewer yards was 42.3%. So you're talking a few ticks under half of your runs for the game. I believe those were all designed handoffs. I don't think scrambles or sacks are considered there. Just another metric. We've seen a lot of them since the game on Saturday. That speaks to the struggles for Auburn in terms of run blocking, and this is what they want their identity to be. You've got maybe the best running back in the entire conference in Tank Bigsby, and when you look at this LSU defensive front, I know that Mason Smith losing him after that first game for them was a big blow. The 5-star defensive tackle, but this is still the best. This is still the most talented defensive front Auburn will see that Auburn has seen so far this season.
They line Tank Bigsby up a lot, 6 yards, 7 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and have some of these slow developing running plays. And it puts a lot of pressure on the offensive line to hold their blocks for a couple seconds. And this group is just not getting the job done in that area. And that's why Tank Bigsby can have more yards after contact last week in a game than he had total yards, which is a crazy stat, but that's the reality of it right now. And, I don't know how they're going to change things up with the running game. Maybe some zone read plays where the offensive line doesn't have to dominate its guys to get that ball running game going. And, when you got Robbie Ashford in there, I mean, that's something that he does very well. And I'm curious to see how much they take advantage of that. But also, when you're running Robbie Ashford, makes him more likely to get injured. And if TJ Finley's not ready to play, you could see the true freshman in again seeing action. So it's really interesting to see how they're going to attack this LSU defense, which they're giving up, I think, 14.3 points per game. And they didn't look great on opening night against Florida State, but looks like to me LSU's improved defensively and really improved everywhere on the team in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's funny. We talked to Ashford yesterday, and somebody asked him about pulling back on the blocks a little bit and getting downfield. You can just kind of tell that, for a guy like that, there's only so much you can do for an in-game situation when you have a competitor like that. I mean, I was thinking the same thing when he lowered his shoulder on the first drive on a scramble. He's a running quarterback. He's been doing this throughout his entire career. And like Mark said, you're just kind of rolling the dice at this point. We saw it. We saw him get injured in this past game in his first, like Jason said, the first extended playing time of his entire career. That's just the kind of player he is. That's just the kind of player that he's been for this offense. And so if he gets injured again, I think, obviously you're going to see Holden Garner in the game, but I don't, wonder how much of the game planning and how much of the coaching is going to be to him about pulling back on those kinds of situations, because that's just been kind of the guy that he is. Talking about LSU briefly, of course, we'll get into them later in the week, but Jason, offensively, they've improved as well. I think there were questions early in the season about which way the starting quarterback spot would go. I wonder how long Jaden Daniels' leash was early in the season. You got a talented guy like Garrett Nussmeier behind him, but we saw big strides it was against New Mexico. But you saw Jaden Daniels have a pretty good game on Saturday. Seems like he's kind of coming into his own there at that quarterback spot for them. But it's interesting. Derek Hall yesterday said it's helpful to go against a guy like Robbie Ashford when you're preparing for a guy like Jaden Daniels who scrambles out of the pocket all the time and is an athletic player at quarterback. I don't think that'll be a shocking player for them to go against, but at the same time, they've had their struggles defending the passing game, and Kayshon Boutte is one of the best receivers in the country, and so definitely that defensive front along with the secondary needs to have a really good game on Saturday, because it seems like LSU is, like Mark said, LSU's kind of picking things up on both sides of the ball really at the right time.
Yeah, you look at this team, and Jaden Daniels is a guy that played a lot of football. When you start thinking about, people think about Auburn losing Bo Nix. That's what he was at Arizona State, a guy that started as a true freshman and played a bunch of games. Now they've had a shortened season a little bit more because of COVID, but this guy's played a lot of football. He's been really successful, and as a freshman, he had a great season. tried to push the envelope the last couple of years, but obviously that was for a program that had a lot of underlying issues, as we continue to see at Arizona State. And he's making the most of an opportunity there. But you look and, Keyshawn Booty gets a lot of the talk, but man, Malik Neighbors, the sophomore wide receiver, is having a really good season so far. You look at him, and Brian Thomas is a 6'4", 200-pound sophomore. Jeray Jenkins is there. Hey, Jack Bash last year, remember what that true freshman did. He's 6'2", 213, big physical guy. And then you look at them, Marty Goodwin is a former Auburn commitment, a long-time Auburn commitment. I think he's kind of day-to-day for them, but they got a lot of other running backs, Noah Kane, John Emery Jr., but Jaden Daniels is the key. And we've seen Auburn, have issues with running quarterbacks, with guys that can make plays with their legs. And that's absolutely one of the things to watch on Saturday is Jaden Daniels getting outside the pocket, doing some of that, and how you deal with it. And Derek Hall, they talked about Robbie Ashford and kind of having a guy like that, but Robbie Ashford and Jaden Daniels are not the same type of quarterback. Now they can both run, but Jaden Daniels is a guy that can throw on the run. He's always looking downfield and doing those things, and they'll do some running game with him. But the thing that stands out for me Saturday, you got two true freshman offensive tackles. Now, these are two talented guys that will be going against some veterans on the outside. But this is by far the biggest offensive line Auburn will have seen this season, and they may be as big as Auburn will see this season. They are huge with 325, 335, center at 295, but everybody else is over 320. That's a big offensive line for a defensive line that we still don't see a ton of rotation from. And how do you hold up against it? I mean, it's a big group. And so, LSU is kind of like Missouri, but much better in that they got a bunch of different guys that'll touch it in the running game and do some different things. But, for this Auburn defense, can you pick up where you left off Saturday against Missouri and create a few negative plays? That's the goal, and it's a must.
Yeah, I believe – I don't know if you saw this, Jason, or had researched it, but it's the first time in LSU history, right, that they've started two true freshmen at the two tackle spots, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not normally done really anywhere. We've seen Alabama start one at times, but it shows you how talented those guys were, that they were able to, and LSU has recruited fairly well at the offensive line positions. I mean, they got some guys that you think about from the recruiting process are names that Auburn people are familiar with. And you think about, Cam Wires played some games. Marcus Dumerville is a guy that Auburn absolutely wanted to sign out of South Florida. Those are the two guys that are kind of the backups at both tackles. And then, Cardell Thomas is a guy that started, as a true freshman for them a couple of years ago and isn't starting on that offensive line. So the fact that they are playing is pretty impressive, because that's an offensive line that has recruited pretty well over the last few years.
Yeah, should be. John Samuel Shanker said it yesterday. I thought it was pretty telling. Regardless of who the coach is, regardless of what the roster looks like, he equates LSU in terms of physicality and talent to Alabama and Georgia. Those were the ones he mentioned. Because, of course, it is Brian Kelly's first ever SEC road trip now as LSU's head coach. It's the first time for LSU. They had a similar home stretch. They haven't left the state of Louisiana until this game. They played, obviously, in the Superdome. They lost to Florida State opening week, but that was in New Orleans. Then they've had 3 straight home games. So this is their first true road game of the season. Auburn obviously doesn't go on the road until next weekend against Georgia. By the way, that's a 2:30 p.m. Kick on CBS. We found out on Monday. So appreciate everybody for tuning in to this midweek episode. Of course, we will get to the roundtable on Thursday morning to talk more in depth and give our picks and predictions for the LSU game, which will be 6 p.m. Central Time Saturday on ESPN, barring some sort of change. We saw South Carolina actually move its game this morning because of the hurricane. Now, logistically, they're playing South Carolina State, so that's a little easier when you got somebody about 100 miles away, just to be able to move the game up. But we'll see what happens. I know Auburn's obviously prepared for anything, and if they do play, it's going to be a rainy day and should be another strange outing in this Auburn LSU series, which we're of course used to over the years. So appreciate everybody listening. If you guys enjoyed the podcast, please go leave us a 5-star review. Thank you to everybody for watching on our Facebook or YouTube live streams. The bumper music is by Beats by Mordecai. You guys can follow him on Twitter, SoundCloud, and Instagram. Until the next episode this week, we will talk to y'all later. Everybody have a great middle of the week.